The Galactic Collective had approximately 47,000 member species, give or take a few hundred depending on which taxonomist you asked and how much they'd had to drink. Of these 47,000 species, roughly 12,000 were classified as predators, 8,000 as prey, and the remaining 27,000 existed in that comfortable middle ground where nobody wanted to eat them and they didn't particularly want to eat anyone else. This system had worked remarkably well for about 16,000 years, which was impressive considering that getting 47,000 species to agree on anything was usually about as easy as teaching a black hole to share. The classification system itself was a masterpiece of bureaucratic precision, mixed with cheerful denial of reality. Species were rated on a scale from 1 to 10 based on factors like fang length, claw sharpness, hunting instincts, and something the assessment board called general murderous inclination. A rating of 1 meant you were essentially an ambulatory salad. A rating of 10 meant your planet's idea of good morning involved something dying before breakfast. Most civilized species hovered comfortably around 3 or 4, which allowed them to feel superior to the prey species while also sleeping soundly, knowing there were regulations preventing anything with a rating above 6 from visiting their homeworlds without extensive supervision. Humans had been provisionally rated as a 7, which had caused approximately 900 diplomatic incidents before lunch on the day the assessment was published. The problem wasn't that humans were particularly violent by absolute standards. The problem was that absolute standards were measured against species that had evolved on planets where a light breeze didn't translate to potential death event, and local wildlife didn't mean everything within 5 kilometers is trying to eat you or poison you or both simultaneously. Earth had weather patterns with body counts, an ocean that drowned people for fun, and a concerning number of creatures that had evolved specifically to ruin someone's day. The assessment board had looked at humanity's homeworld, looked at the fact that humans had not only survived, but thrived there, and had immediately requested hazard pay. But the collective was built on the principle that all sapient species could coexist peacefully, provided there were enough regulations in place to prevent the naturally violent ones from acting on their baser instincts. Thus was born the hunting preserve system, which allowed predator species to engage in their traditional hunting practices in controlled environments with non-sapient prey animals specifically bred for this purpose. It was humane, it was regulated, and it allowed species like the Zarath to maintain their cultural heritage without turning the galaxy into an interstellar bloodbath. The Zarath were what happened when evolution looked at a species and decided that being merely dangerous wasn't sufficient. They stood 9 feet tall on digitigrade legs that ended in talons designed by a sadist with an engineering degree. They had 6 limbs total, 4 arms ending in claws that could rend steel, and those aforementioned legs that could launch them 30 feet in any direction. Their heads were vaguely reptilian, all angles and teeth, with eyes that saw into the infrared spectrum and could track movement from half a mile away. Their homeworld of Zar was a high-gravity nightmare where everything was either predator or already dead. And the Zarath had emerged as the undisputed apex of the food chain through a combination of pack tactics, terrifying physical capabilities, and what anthropologists politely called enthusiastic violence. They were also, it should be noted, absolutely insufferable about it. Zarath culture revolved around the hunt. Your status in society was determined by what you'd killed, how impressively you'd killed it, and how many witnesses could verify that you'd killed it. They had elaborate ceremonies, complex ranking systems, and entire libraries dedicated to proper hunting etiquette. They were the kind of species that would argue for 6 hours about whether killing something with your primary arms or secondary arms was more prestigious, and then challenge each other to duels over the conclusion. The collective had tried very hard to integrate them into civilized society. The Zarath had tried very hard to follow the rules. Both parties had succeeded admirably, right up until 4 Zarath students at Vrais Academy discovered there was a human in their xenobiology program, and their cultural instincts overrode their common sense. Vrais Academy was perched on Station Kepler 9, a massive orbital installation that circled a pleasant yellow star in a system so boring that the original survey team had nearly fallen asleep filling out the paperwork. It was perfect for an educational institution. No geological instability, no hostile wildlife, no weather to speak of, and enough artificial gravity generators to keep 90% of known species comfortable. The station housed approximately 50,000 students from across the collective, studying everything from quantum mechanics to interpretive dance, though the xenobiology program was the crown jewel of the institution. The xenobiology department occupied an entire ring of the station, with laboratories, specimen storage facilities, research annexes, and enough preserved organs to stock a museum of natural history. The facilities were state-of-the-art. The faculty were leaders in their fields, and the student body included some of the brightest minds in the galaxy. And one human named Juniper Kovac. June, because nobody used her full name except her mother when she was in trouble, was 23 Earth years old, which translated to roughly the same in galactic standard because humanity had stubbornly refused to change their time measurements just because everyone else used a different system. She stood 5'6", had sandy blonde hair that she kept in a perpetually messy braid, green eyes that cataloged everything they saw with unnerving precision, and the kind of wiry build that came from growing up rock climbing in Colorado and running cross-country in high school. She had applied to Vrais Academy's doctoral program in comparative xenobiology with a research proposal about convergent evolution in predator species across different planetary environments. Her application essay had impressed the review board. Her undergraduate transcripts from MIT had impressed them more. The fact that she'd done her master's thesis on the biomechanics of ambush predators while working part-time as a wilderness rescue volunteer had impressed them most of all, though several board members had expressed concern about exactly what kind of rescue scenarios she'd encountered. June had been at Vrais for 7 months. Her professors found her brilliant, meticulous, and occasionally unsettling in her approach to dissections. Her classmates found her friendly enough but distant, always polite but never quite social. She attended lectures, participated in lab work with disturbing competence, and spent most of her free time in the research annexes working on her dissertation. Her dissertation was on the neurological structures that governed hunting behavior in apex predators. She had permission to access preserved specimens from 43 different species, including several that were extinct and 2 that had been banned from collective space for being too dangerous. She worked primarily in Research Annex 7, which was located in the older section of the xenobiology ring and scheduled for renovation in approximately 4 months. This meant that Annex 7 was usually empty except for June, which was exactly how she liked it. The 4 Zarath students, Vexer, Krill, Nethys, and Raxel, had been at Vrais for 2 semesters. They were all from prominent hunting clans, had impeccable academic credentials that their families had definitely not purchased through generous donations, and were studying xenobiology primarily because it gave them access to information about potential prey species. They attended classes when required, maintained passing grades through a combination of natural intelligence and strategic cheating, and spent most of their time discussing hunting strategy and complaining that the preserve system didn't allow them to hunt anything truly challenging. Then they learned there was a human in their program. A human, a Deathworlder, a species rated 7 on the Predator scale, which put them in the same category as the Vrelian shock troopers and the Korthian berserkers. A species from a planet so hostile that the survey team's report had included the phrase, recommend quarantine and prayer in the executive summary. A species that had at their own world trying to kill them and had responded by inventing agriculture, civilization, and nuclear weapons, in that order. The Zarath had immediately checked the hunting regulations. The regulations were, admittedly, complex. They had been written and rewritten approximately 600 times over the past 1,000 years as various species joined the collective, and someone had to figure out whether they were allowed to hunt or be hunted, or both, or neither. The current version was approximately 40,000 pages long and included subsections on everything from proper prey designation to what constituted fair chase, to whether using technological advantages was sporting or just cheating. The relevant section, as far as the Zarath were concerned, was Section 47, subsection 12, paragraph 94, which stated that members of predator species could apply for permits to hunt other predator species in designated challenge preserves, provided both parties consented and proper safety protocols were observed. The subsection had been written to allow for ceremonial combat between consenting adults from warrior cultures. It was meant for species like the Vrais, who occasionally liked to beat each other senseless in ritual combat as a form of dispute resolution and social bonding. The Zarath interpreted it to mean they could hunt a human if they could get her alone and claim she'd consented to a challenge. They were very good at hunting. They were significantly less good at reading comprehension. For 3 weeks, they watched June's patterns. They noted that she arrived at Annex 7 around 1400 hours standard time every Tuesday and Thursday. They observed that she worked alone, often until 2100 hours or later. They confirmed that Annex 7 was in the old section of the station, where the security systems were outdated and scheduled for replacement. They verified that the surveillance cameras in that section had been malfunctioning for months, with repairs perpetually delayed due to budget constraints and the upcoming renovation. They planned their approach with a kind of meticulous attention to detail that would have been impressive if applied to literally anything else. On the 14th Thursday since they'd begun planning, they made their move. June was working on a Vrelian neural cluster when she heard the door open. This was unusual. Nobody else worked in Annex 7 on Thursday evenings. She didn't look up immediately. She was in the middle of separating a particularly delicate synaptic junction, and her hands were steady in a way that suggested she really should finish what she was doing before dealing with interruptions. She completed the separation, set down her micromanipulator, pulled off her magnification visor, and turned around. 4 Zarath stood in the doorway. They were wearing what she recognized from her studies as traditional hunting gear. Minimal armor that showed off their musculature, ceremonial weapons that were definitely not standard campus equipment, and expressions that she had seen before on the faces of mountain lions that had wandered too close to civilization and forgotten that humans were significantly more dangerous than they looked. Juniper Kovac? Vexer said, his voice a clicking rasp that the translator rendered into collective standard. Human. Deathworld predator. We invoke the ancient right of challenge. We shall hunt you according to the traditions of our people, and your death will bring honor to our clans. June looked at them. Then she looked at the door behind them, which they'd sealed. Then she looked at the emergency exit on the far side of the lab, which was blocked by 3 tons of equipment. Then she looked back at the Zarath and sighed the kind of sigh that suggested she was deeply, profoundly tired of this exact type of nonsense. No, she said. This was not the response they had expected. Krill's crest flared in confusion. You do not understand. This is a great honor. We offer you the chance to die as a warrior, facing worthy opponents in glorious combat. I understand perfectly, June said. You're four idiots who misread the hunting regulations, didn't bother to check whether challenge combat requires actual consent from both parties, and somehow convinced yourselves that cornering someone in a laboratory counts as a fair hunt. She paused. Also, you sealed the door behind you, which violates approximately 37 safety codes and will trigger an automatic lockdown alert to campus security in about 90 seconds. The Zarath looked at each other. However, June continued, since you've already committed to this stupendously bad decision, let me explain what's actually going to happen. First, I'm going to disable all four of you using a combination of techniques I learned in Krav Maga, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and from my grandfather, who fought in 3 wars and believed that if you weren't willing to bite someone's ear off, you weren't serious about winning. Second, I'm going to stage this scene to look like you broke in here to steal expensive equipment, triggered a chemical spill, and knocked yourselves unconscious in the resulting panic. Third, I'm going to call campus security and give a statement that will be completely factual except for the part where I mentioned kicking your asses. Fourth, you're going to wake up in medical, get expelled from the academy, and probably exiled from your clans for bringing dishonor through sheer incompetence. She tilted her head slightly. Or you could leave right now, and we can all pretend this never happened. Your choice. Nethys growled, a sound like rocks in a grinder. You speak boldly for prey that is cornered. I'm not cornered, June said. You are. You just don't know it yet. Raxel activated his plasma caster, which hummed with enough energy to punch through combat armor. Enough talk. We have offered honor. You have refused. Now you die. Okay, June said and moved. What happened next took approximately 93 seconds, which was 90 seconds longer than the Zarath had expected the fight to last, and 93 seconds shorter than they needed to reconsider their life choices. June had grown up in Boulder, Colorado, where her parents had enrolled her in martial arts classes from age 6 because their neighborhood had a problem with attempted abductions, and they decided their daughter was going to be the worst possible target anyone could choose. She had learned Taekwondo from a Korean instructor who believed proper kicks could solve most interpersonal conflicts. She had learned Krav Maga from an Israeli veteran who believed that if you weren't willing to gouge eyes and break knees, you weren't serious about survival. She had learned Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu from a coach who believed that size advantages meant nothing if you understood leverage and anatomy. She had learned boxing from her grandfather, who had served in the Marines and believed that sometimes you just needed to punch someone in the face repeatedly until they stopped being a problem. She had also spent her entire graduate career studying the anatomical vulnerabilities of predator species across the galaxy. The Zarath thought they were hunting a prey species that happened to be classified as a predator for bureaucratic reasons. They were actually attacking something that had spent 4 billion years surviving on a planet that was actively trying to kill it, and had gotten so good at not dying that it had achieved sentience out of spite. Vexor lunged first, all 4 arms extending in a grab that should have pinned her instantly. June dropped into a crouch that put her under his center of mass, drove her shoulder into his midsection with Deathworld muscle density behind it, and used his own momentum to flip him over her back. He crashed into a laboratory table with enough force to crack the reinforced polymer surface. Krill came in from the side, talons extended for a disemboweling strike that would have worked on literally any prey species in the galaxy. June had already spun away from Vexor, caught Krill's leading arm, and used a joint lock that turned his own muscular strength against him. The Zarath's shoulder joint made a popping sound that was audible across the laboratory. She drove her knee into his kidney, or the Zarath equivalent, which she knew from her studies was located in approximately the same position. And he went down gasping. Nethys and Raxul attacked simultaneously, which showed better tactical thinking than their companions had demonstrated. Nethys came low while Wraxel aimed his plasma caster. June grabbed a metal specimen tray from the counter and hurled it like a discus at Wraxel's head. It caught him across the face with enough force to shatter his translator and several teeth. His plasma shot went wide, punching a hole through the ceiling and triggering the fire suppression system. Nethys's low attack got him exactly where he wanted, wrapped around June's legs in a hold that should have immobilized her completely. What it actually got him was an elbow strike to the back of his skull, with enough force to rattle his brain against the inside of his very thick cranium. He didn't release immediately, so she grabbed one of his secondary arms and bent it backward until the joint failed with a wet cracking sound. He released. Vexor was getting back up, bleeding from multiple cuts where he'd hit the table but still functional. June grabbed a container of hydrochloric acid from the counter, properly sealed, labeled, and rated for storage, and threw it at his head. He caught it reflexively, which was exactly what she wanted. While he was distracted, she vaulted over a workstation, landed next to him, and delivered a spinning back kick to his knee that bent it at an angle knees were absolutely not designed to bend. He went down screaming. Wraxel had recovered from the tray impact and was bringing his plasma caster to bear again. June was already moving, closing the distance before he could aim properly. She got inside his guard, grabbed the caster with one hand while striking his throat with the other. The Zarath had their primary airway in a similar position to humans, according to her anatomical studies. Wraxel made a choking sound and dropped the weapon. June caught it before it hit the floor, reversed it, and slammed the butt into his solar plexus. He folded like laundry. Krill was trying to get up, favoring his dislocated shoulder, but still dangerous. June kicked him in the head. Not a fancy martial arts kick, just a straightforward boot to the cranium that suggested she'd grown up playing soccer and understood exactly how much force a human leg could generate. He stopped trying to get up. Nethys was crawling toward the door, his broken arm dangling uselessly. June walked over, grabbed his tail, which her studies had informed her was a balance organ and thus sensitive to pain, and yanked hard enough to get his attention. "Stay," she said, and he stayed. June stood in the wreckage of the laboratory, surrounded by 4 injured Zarath, breathing hard but not particularly winded. She checked the time. 1847 hours. The fire suppression system had triggered when the plasma shot went through the ceiling, which meant campus security had definitely been alerted. She had maybe 3 minutes before they arrived. She got to work with the kind of efficient precision that would have impressed a crime scene investigator. First, she dragged all 4 Zarath to the center of the room and arranged them in a configuration that suggested they'd been moving equipment, triggered the fire suppression system, panicked, and injured themselves in the resulting chaos. She made sure their injuries could plausibly be explained by falling, running into things, and generally being clumsy. Second, she removed their ceremonial weapons and hid them in a biohazard container that was scheduled for incineration. Their plasma caster went into a different container. Their hunting permits, which she found in Vexor's equipment pouch, went into a third container. All 3 containers were sealed and logged for disposal. Third, she triggered a chemical spill by accidentally knocking over several containers of harmless but foul-smelling compounds. The lab now looked like a disaster zone, which was perfect. Fourth, she accessed the laboratory's computer system and checked the security logs. The cameras in this section were indeed malfunctioning, but the building's access system had logged the Zarath entering at 1843 hours. She couldn't delete that without raising suspicions, but she could add a notation that they'd requested access for equipment transport assistance, and she'd granted it because she was working in the same section. Fifth, she cleaned herself up in the emergency shower, which was conveniently already running due to the fire suppression system, and changed into the spare clothes she kept in her locker. Sixth, she called campus security and reported an accident. By the time security arrived at 1851 hours, they found June providing first aid to 4 injured Zarath students in a laboratory that looked like a chemical spill had caused a panic. The students were unconscious or semi-conscious, groaning in pain and clearly in need of medical attention. "I was working on my dissertation," June explained to the security officer, her voice perfectly steady. "They came to help me move some equipment. There are some heavy specimen containers that need relocating before the renovation. One of them accidentally triggered the plasma torch near the chemical storage. The fire suppression system activated, everyone panicked, and they injured themselves trying to evacuate." The security officer looked around the laboratory. "Where's the plasma torch?" "There," June said, pointing to a workstation where a plasma cutting tool was indeed sitting, properly secured but plausibly close to the chemical storage. "And you weren't injured?" "I was in the emergency shower when the suppression system activated. The sealed chamber protected me from the worst of the chemical exposure. When I came out, I found them like this and called for help immediately." The officer made notes. "They're pretty badly injured for a panic evacuation." "It's a laboratory full of heavy equipment and sharp instruments," June said. "Panic makes people clumsy. I think Vexer fell into that table. You can see where the surface cracked. Krill ran into the equipment rack over there. The others probably slipped in the chemical spill." It was a perfect explanation. It fit the evidence. It made sense. It gave everyone involved a plausible narrative that didn't require anyone to admit that 4 Zarath hunters had attempted to murder a human student and gotten absolutely demolished for their trouble. The investigation took 5 days. Campus security reviewed the evidence, interviewed witnesses, and tried to understand how 4 healthy Zarath students had managed to injure themselves so severely in what should have been a simple equipment transport task. The Zarath, once conscious, were initially belligerent. They demanded to file charges against the human who had attacked them. They insisted they'd been ambushed. They claimed they were the victims. This fell apart immediately when security pointed out that the laboratory access logs showed they'd requested entry for equipment transport. There was no evidence of combat, only evidence of a chemical spill and panic. Their injuries were consistent with falling, running into equipment, and general clumsiness. Their ceremonial weapons were mysteriously missing, which suggested they'd never had weapons in the first place. June Kovac had been providing first aid when security arrived. Their stories conflicted wildly with each other and with the physical evidence. Their legal advisor, when presented with these facts, strongly recommended they accept the official findings and face whatever disciplinary action the Academy decided to impose. The Academy decided that 4 students entering a laboratory without proper authorization, causing a chemical spill, and injuring themselves through negligence, was grounds for academic probation, mandatory safety retraining, and a formal reprimand. The Zarath clan elders, when informed of the incident, were significantly less forgiving. Attempting to hunt a sapient being, failing spectacularly, and then bringing dishonor to the clan by filing false charges was grounds for exile, stripping of clan affiliation, and permanent ban from participating in traditional hunts. The 4 former hunters left Vrais Academy 3 weeks later. Their academic careers destroyed, their hunting privileges revoked, and their reputations in absolute ruins. June continued attending classes, working on her dissertation, and staying late in the research annexes. Her professors noted that she seemed unusually focused after the incident, completing her research ahead of schedule despite the traumatic experience of dealing with the chemical spill. Her dissertation topic shifted slightly. Instead of general hunting behavior in apex predators, She focused specifically on the cognitive biases that caused predator species to misidentify threats. Her thesis concluded that species from low-challenge environments often developed overconfidence in their abilities and failed to recognize when they were outmatched by prey that had evolved sophisticated defensive capabilities. She received the highest marks in her program's history. Her classmates, particularly the predator species, began giving her considerably more personal space. No one could articulate exactly why. But there was something about the way she moved, the way she watched, the way she smiled, that polite smile that never reached her eyes, that suggested approaching her uninvited would be a spectacularly poor decision. The security cameras in Research Annex 7 were finally replaced in week 12 of the semester. The new cameras had excellent resolution, comprehensive coverage, and redundant backup systems. June made sure to smile and wave at them every time she entered. 4 months later, the Galactic Collective quietly updated their hunting regulations. Section 47, subsection 12, paragraph 94 was amended to explicitly state that challenge combat required documented consent from both parties, witnessed by neutral observers, conducted in designated facilities with proper medical support, and absolutely, positively, under no circumstances included humans or other Deathworld species, unless said humans explicitly volunteered in writing with legal counsel present. The amendment was unofficially called the Kovac Clause by legal scholars, though no one used that term in official documents. June graduated from Vrais Academy 18 months later with her doctorate, 3 published papers, and 5 job offers from prestigious research institutions. She accepted a position at the Collective Institute for Predator Studies, where she would spend the next decade researching why predator species consistently underestimated prey that had evolved on high-challenge worlds. She never spoke publicly about the incident in Research Annex 7. When journalists asked about it during interviews, she would smile that smile and note that the official report was available through campus security archives. Her smile, people noted, was very white, very even, very reminiscent of the kind of expression a predator made before it struck. The Zarath species, for their part, quietly removed humans from their list of approved challenge prey. This decision was made during a clan gathering where the elders reviewed the medical reports, the security findings, and the disturbing lack of any actual evidence that their warriors had done anything except injure themselves through incompetence. She fought 4 trained hunters, one elder noted, and left no evidence of combat whatsoever. She hunted the hunters, another said quietly, and no one saw a thing. Perhaps, the eldest said after a long silence, our understanding of the predator-prey dynamic requires reconsideration. The motion passed unanimously. Back on Earth, June's parents received a message from their daughter mentioning she'd handled a situation at school and everything was fine. Her mother, who had paid for those martial arts classes, and her father, who had taught her that the best fights were the ones nobody could prove happened, exchanged knowing looks and sent back a care package. They didn't ask questions. They'd raised their daughter to survive in a world that was trying to kill her. They trusted she could handle a galaxy that had merely underestimated her. The galaxy continued spinning. Students came and went from Vrais Academy. Predator species continued their hunts on designated preserves. The collective continued refining regulations to account for species that didn't fit neatly into their threat classifications. And in research facilities across civilized space, human xenobiologists continued studying the fascinating creatures they shared the galaxy with, taking meticulous notes, learning every anatomical detail, and quietly maintaining humanity's perfect record of not being eaten by anything that tried. The trick, as it turned out, was knowing when to run and when to stand your ground and make sure nobody ever found enough evidence to prove what actually happened. June Kovach had never been very good at running anyway. But she was excellent at making sure no one saw a thing.